My name is Alara. For 7 years, my world was built upon the foundation of my marriage to David. We met in college, two ambitious souls from different worlds, my small-town practicality drawn to his city-born charm. I gave up my hometown, my support network, everything to build a life with him in the sprawling, impersonal city he called home. Our son Leo was the radiant center of my universe, a universe that felt complete, if sometimes quietly exhausting. The call came at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Leo was finally asleep after a feverish day and I was scrolling through my phone, my mind numb with fatigue. "Is this Mrs. Alara Vance?" a formal male voice asked. "Yes, speaking. This is Officer Chin from the 6th Precinct. Your husband, David Vance, has been involved in a motor vehicle accident. He's being treated at Mercy General Hospital." The room tilted. David was on a business trip in Sterling, the neighboring city. He texted me just 2 hours ago saying a project deadline had been extended, and he'd be back in a couple of days. I could still see the message on my screen. A cold, disbelieving laugh escaped my lips. "Officer, there must be a mistake. My husband is in Sterling. He just messaged me. Ma'am, I have his ID and registration here. The vehicle is registered to David and Alara Vance. He was a passenger in a rideshare." A female companion provided his details. She gave her name as Chloe. Chloe. The name didn't compute at first. Then it landed with the force of a physical blow. Chloe. My Chloe. The friend who had cried with me over breakups, celebrated my promotion, held my hand during my terrifying first ultrasound. The one who brought chicken soup when Leo and I were sick last winter. Chloe. I repeated, my voice a thin thread. "Yes, ma'am. She's being treated for minor lacerations. Your husband's injuries appear more significant. You should come to the hospital." The phone slipped from my hand. The world fractured into 1,000 glittering, sharp pieces. David. Chloe. A rideshare. A business trip that wasn't. The carefully constructed reality of my life revealed itself as a diorama made of tissue paper and lies. Panic, cold and precise, injected itself into my veins. I moved on autopilot. I called Mrs. Alves, our wonderful, kind-hearted neighbor who adored Leo. My voice was surprisingly steady as I explained a family emergency. She was at my door in 5 minutes, her face etched with concern, asking no questions as I thrust Leo's favorite blanket and his emergency medication list into her hands. "Take all the time you need, Querida," she whispered, pressing my arm. Her compassion almost undid me. The drive to Mercy General was a blur of neon signs and screaming silence. My mind was a riot of conflicting images. David smiling over breakfast, his suitcase by the door. Chloe laughing over a glass of wine, complaining about the dating scene. The two images began to bleed together, forming a grotesque new picture. How long? How many times? In our bed? The nausea was visceral. I found the emergency department, a chaotic landscape of fluorescent light and low moans. The nurse at the desk directed me to the surgical waiting area. "Mr. Vance is out of surgery. Room 412. Stable condition." Stable. The word was an anchor. I clutched it. Pushing open the door to room 412, I saw him. David was propped up in bed, his left arm in a cast and sling, a bandage on his forehead. But his right hand was moving rapidly, thumb swiping across his phone screen. He looked pale, tired, but very much alive and very much texting. Our eyes met. In that split second, I saw a kaleidoscope of emotions flash across his face. Shock, panic, guilt, and then a rapid, desperate calculation. The master negotiator, even in a hospital bed. "Alara? Honey, what are you doing here?" The concern in his voice was so practiced, so flawless, it took my breath away. If I hadn't stood in my kitchen holding the phone while a police officer said Chloe's name, I would have believed it. I didn't move from the doorway. I held up my own phone, the screen still lit with his last message. "Project blew up. Need 2 more days in Sterling. Sorry, babe. Miss you." "I got a call," I said, my voice eerily calm. "From the police. They said you were in an accident. With Chloe." He actually had the gall to look confused for a microsecond before the mask of pained apology slid back into place. "Oh God, Alara. Listen, I can explain. I was going to surprise you. I was coming home early and I ran into Chloe at the airport coffee shop. Her flight was cancelled. She was stranded. I offered her a ride back to the city. I was going to drop her off and be home before you knew it. Surprise. But then, the truck, it ran the light. He let his head fall back against the pillow, the picture of weary, unfortunate honesty. It was a good story. Plausible even. It acknowledged Chloe's presence while framing it as a chance, chivalrous encounter. The David I fell in love with would have done exactly that. But that David felt like a ghost. Is that so? I whispered. The police said you were in a rideshare. Not your car. A flicker in his eyes. A tiny crack in the facade. I left my car at the long-term lot in Sterling. For the extended trip. We got a car to come back. Before I could fire another question, the door swung open. And there she was. Chloe. She looked like a storm had passed through her. A butterfly bandage on her temple, her usually impeccable hair slightly mussed. She was holding a clipboard with discharge papers. When she saw me, her eyes widened in genuine, unfeigned shock. It was the most authentic reaction I'd seen all night. Alara, she breathed. All the calm I'd mustered evaporated. A white-hot fury rose in my throat. What are you doing here, Chloe? The question hung in the antiseptic air, heavy with meaning. David jumped in, his voice tight. Chloe, it's fine. I was just explaining to Alara about the airport. Chloe looked from his panicked face to my icy one. For a long moment she teetered. I saw the conflict, the lie they'd prepared versus the undeniable truth standing before her. Then something in her hardened. A defiant, almost pitying look settled on her face. She walked past me and placed the clipboard on David's bedside table. It's okay, David. She was going to find out eventually. She turned to me, crossing her arms. Yes, Alara. I'm with your husband. We've been together for over a year. He's been with me on all those business trips. The words were physical blows. Each one landed with a sickening thud in the pit of my stomach. A year. My best friend. My husband. The dates, the absences, the vague texts, they all snapped into a horrific clear pattern. David's face went ashen. Chloe, shut up. But she was unleashed, a venom finally freed. Look at you, she said, her gaze sweeping over me with contempt. When was the last time you looked in a mirror? You're a frump, Alara. You've let yourself go completely. You think David wants to come home to this? She gestured vaguely at my worn sweater and yoga pants, at the tiredness I knew was etched deep into my face. You're just the boring housewife he has to check in with. I'm the one he lives with. The humiliation was absolute, a public flaying. She was voicing every secret insecurity I'd batted away during lonely nights with a sick toddler. Before I could even think, my arm swung. The sound of my palm connecting with her cheek was a sharp, satisfying crack in the sterile room. She staggered back, a hand flying to her face, her eyes blazing with shock and fury. You bitch. That's for being a home-wrecking whore. I spat, the crude word feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. You deserve each other. A liar and a slut. A perfect match. David was struggling to get out of bed, his foreline tugging. Alara. For God's sake. Chloe lunged at me, nails bared, but I was fueled by a primal rage. I shoved her hard and she stumbled into a visitor's chair, knocking it over with a clatter. The noise finally brought a nurse and an orderly rushing in. What is going on in here? This is a hospital. I stood there, chest heaving, pointing a trembling finger at David. He's all yours. Take good care of him. I looked at Chloe, a cold, dead feeling settling over the fury. And you enjoy your prize. I turned and walked out, their shouts and the nurse's admonishments fading behind me. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles. The cold night air outside hit me like a slap and the dam finally broke. Sobs racked my body, silent and violent, as I leaned against the rough concrete wall of the hospital. My husband. My friend. My life. All of it a carefully constructed lie. But beneath the torrent of grief, something else stirred. A small, hard, diamond-like point of clarity. They thought I was broken. They thought I was defeated. They saw a frump, a boring housewife, a pushover. As I drove through the empty streets toward Mrs. Alves's and my sleeping son, that diamond point began to gleam. It wasn't hope. It was something darker, sharper, more determined. Revenge. The game was on. And they had just severely underestimated their opponent. The next week passed in a haze of surreal, grim routine. David was discharged after 2 days of observation. He came home with his arm in a sling, a picture of pathetic contrition. He had a new, more elaborate story. A tale of emotional neglect, of feeling lost as I poured all my love into Leo, of Chloe being a mistake that spiraled out of control when she threatened to expose him. He slept on the couch. I didn't argue. My silence, I could see, unnerved him more than screaming would have. He expected tears, drama, a messy emotional scene he could navigate and ultimately dismiss. He did not expect the cold, quiet woman who moved through the apartment like a ghost, her eyes assessing, calculating. I spent my days caring for Leo, who was thankfully recovering from his virus. His warm, small body clinging to mine was my only tether to sanity. At night, after he was asleep, I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and truly look at myself as Chloe had dared me to. She wasn't entirely wrong. The woman staring back was a stranger. My hair was lank, pulled into a perpetual messy bun. The shadows under my eyes were permanent residents. My skin was pale, dull. The clothes I wore were faded, stretched-out maternity wear or David's old sweatshirts. I looked drained. Not just tired but emptied. I had poured every ounce of myself into being a mother and a wife, and somewhere along the line, I had forgotten to be Alara. The financial reality was even more humiliating. Since leaving my marketing job when Leo was born, I had been entirely dependent on David. He gave me a monthly household allowance, transferred to a joint account I used for groceries and bills. Any personal purchase, a new shirt, a haircut, a book, required a conversation, a justification. I remembered once when the account was bare before payday and we were out of milk, I'd asked him for $40. He'd sighed, the long-suffering provider, pulled two $20 bills from his wallet, and tossed them on the counter like I was a beggar. Try to make it last, Alara. Money doesn't grow on trees. That moment, the feel of that crumpled paper, the condescension in his voice, had seared my soul. I had stopped asking for anything after that. I'd learned to make do, to patch, to go without. Now that dependency felt like a prison. He held the keys to my cage. Money, stability, our home. To break free, I needed my own key. The first step was intelligence. I needed proof, not for my heart. It had all the proof it needed. But for leverage for the future I was beginning to plan. Divorce was inevitable, but I would not be the penniless, homeless divorcee he expected. I would not let him take Leo into his new, tawdry life with Chloe. A simple internet search yielded what I needed. A compact, magnetic GPS tracker. It arrived in discreet packaging 2 days later. While David showered, I slipped out to the parking garage and placed it deep inside the wheel well of his sedan. An app on my phone, hidden in a folder named Weather Data, now showed his every move. It didn't take long. The very next evening, after a tense, silent dinner, he announced he was going for a drive to clear his head. His phone lit up with a text as he said it. He didn't see me see it, but I didn't need to. On my screen, a little blue dot left our neighborhood, navigated across town and stopped at the Azure Hotel, a mid-tier place known for hourly rates. He was back 3 hours later, smelling of cheap hotel soap and guilt. He tried to engage me in conversation about Leo's preschool. I answered in monosyllables, my mind on the digital breadcrumb trail now stored on my phone. The next day I acted. It was time to reclaim a piece of myself. I logged into our joint account. David's paycheck had just cleared. I opened my favorite clothing retailer's app, the one where I'd kept a wish list for years, adding and removing items I never dared buy. With a cold, steady click, I purchased 3 items. A pair of tailored trousers that promised to hold their shape, a simple silk blend tank top in emerald green, and a structured blazer. The total was more than I had spent on myself in the past 2 years combined. The notification time on David's phone in the living room was instantaneous. I heard the rustle of the couch, then heavy footsteps. He appeared in the bedroom doorway, phone in his good hand, face flushed with anger. Alara, what the hell is this? A $200 charge at Elegance. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. Clothes, I said plainly. Clothes? What do you need clothes for? You're home all day. You could get something perfectly fine online for a fraction of that. I closed the book slowly. The diamond core of my resolve hardened. You're right, David. I'm home all day. Looking after our son. Managing our home. Ensuring you have a clean, quiet, stable place to come back to from your business trips. I let the phrase hang loaded. That work has value. And the woman doing it shouldn't have to look like a charity case. If you're ashamed of how I look, then I'm fixing the problem. Unless you'd prefer to stay home with Leo while I go back to work? My salary at Grayson and Lowe was, 15% higher than yours when I left. His face cycled through shock, fury, and a flicker of fear. He was used to controlling the narrative, the finances, the emotional temperature. My calm, logical rebellion was a language he didn't understand. You can't just spend money like that, he sputtered, deflecting. It's our money, David. Half of every dollar you earn is legally mine. I've been stabilizing the rear so you could advance at your precious firm. Think of it as a long overdue stipend. He glared at me, his jaw working. For a second I thought he might say something truly unforgivable. Then, with a sound of pure disgust, he turned and slammed the bedroom door so hard the frame shook. The noise woke Leo. His frightened cries pierced the silence. I rushed to his room, gathered him into my arms, his small body trembling. "Sure, baby, it's okay. Mama's here." He pulled back, his little hands patting my wet cheeks. "Mama's sad." I hugged him tighter, kissing his hair. "No, sweetheart. Mama's not sad. Mama's getting strong." The packages arrived 2 days later. Trying the clothes on in my bedroom felt like a ritual. The fabrics felt alien against my skin. Smooth, cool, holding me in a way the shapeless cottons did not. I looked in the mirror. The woman was still tired, still wounded, but there was a hint of a structure, a definition that had been missing. She looked like someone who had a spine. It was a small act, a tiny rebellion. But it was mine. And it was just the beginning. The tracker continued to ping from hotels, and I noted with interest a pharmacy. The plot, as they say, was thickening. And I was no longer just a victim in it. I was becoming the author. The evidence on my phone was a damning digital tapestry. The tracker logs painted a map of deceit. Hotels, a particularly long stay at an apartment complex across town, Chloe's I presumed, even a visit to a jewelry store that made my stomach twist. Alongside this, I had saved every one of Chloe's escalating provocations. After the hospital, her text had shifted from gloating to something darker, more obsessive. She'd begun sending photos. A blurry shot of David's hand on a restaurant table next to a wine glass that wasn't mine. A selfie of her in a bathroom mirror, wearing what looked like one of his dress shirts. A close-up of 2 intertwined coffee mugs on a balcony I didn't recognize. Each was a little grenade lobbed into my life, designed to shatter my peace. Instead, I meticulously saved them, filed them in a secure cloud folder labeled tax docs. David, believing my silence was a form of surrender, grew bolder. His apologies dried up. He began making snide remarks, critiquing my cooking, my parenting, my appearance, trying to re-establish dominance in the only way he knew, through petty cruelty. "You used to have such a spark, Ilara," he said one evening, watching me scrub a pot. "Now you're just functional." I didn't respond. I simply turned off the water, dried my hands, and walked to Leo's room to read him a story. The anger was there, a banked fire, but I was learning to use its heat, not be consumed by its flames. My target was not a cutting retort. My target was his future. I knew where Chloe lived now, the tracker had shown me. I also knew from years of friendship about her parents, Charles and Evelyn Finch. Respected, retired literature professors who lived in the ivy-covered faculty housing of the old university district. They were proud, academic, and deeply concerned with propriety and reputation. Chloe was their only child, their brilliant, beautiful progeny. The idea that she was the other woman in a sordid affair would be anathema to them. One Saturday, when David announced he was going to the gym, the dot on my phone began moving toward Chloe's apartment. I made my move. I dressed carefully in my new trousers and blazer. I needed to look credible, sane, and tragically wronged, not a hysterical wife. Mrs. Alves, now fully aware of the situation and radiating a fierce, grandmotherly fury on my behalf, took Leo for the afternoon. "You go give them hell, Mija," she said, squeezing my hand. The Finch residence was exactly as I remembered. A quaint, well-kept cottage with climbing roses even in late fall. My heart pounded against my ribs as I rang the bell. Professor Finch answered, peering at me over his reading glasses. He looked older, more frail than I remembered. "Yes. Can I help you?" "Professor Finch. My name is Ilara Vance. I was a friend of Chloe's. I wonder if I might speak with you and Mrs. Finch for a moment? It's about Chloe. It's rather urgent." A flicker of concern crossed his face. "Evelyn. It's for Chloe," he called over his shoulder, stepping aside to let me in. The living room was a temple to intellectualism. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, Persian rugs, the faint smell of old paper and chamomile tea. Evelyn Finch appeared, wiping her hands on an apron. She recognized me slowly. "Alara? David's wife. What's this about? Is Chloe all right?" "Physically she's fine," I began, my voice carefully modulated to convey grave concern rather than rage. "I'm here about a situation that involves her and my husband, David." Evelyn's hand went to her throat. "What situation?" I took a deep breath, the wounded wife forced into this unsavory task. "For over a year, Mrs. Finch, Chloe has been having an affair with David. I discovered it when they were in a car accident together. David had told me he was on a business trip." I pulled out my phone, opening the folder. I didn't want to believe it. But the evidence. And Chloe herself has been quite communicative. I handed the phone to Evelyn. On the screen was the clearest photo Chloe had sent. The two of them, faces close, smiling over cocktails at a rooftop bar. It was unmistakably them, unmistakably intimate. The color drained from Evelyn's face. Charles snatched the phone, his eyes scanning the image, then moving to the next one I'd pulled up. The selfie in the bathroom mirror. A low, pained sound escaped him, like the air leaving a bellows. This is preposterous," Charles stammered, but the conviction was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. "There must be an explanation." I confronted David. I continued softly, retrieving my phone. "He confirmed it. He said it's been going on for a year. He's at her apartment right now." I let that hang in the quiet, book-lined room. "I'm so sorry to bring this to you. I'm trying to handle things for the sake of my young son. But Chloe's actions, they're making it impossible. She sends me things like this constantly." I didn't know where else to turn. I had framed it perfectly. Not as an attack, but as a desperate appeal for help from one respectable family to another. I was the blameless mother, protecting her child from chaos. Chloe was the out-of-control homewrecker, shaming their good name. Evelyn sank into a wingback chair, her face ashen. All those nights she said she was working late, or at a book club. Her voice was a whisper of shattered illusions. Charles's initial shock was hardening into a rigid, cold anger. Not at me, but at the daughter who had betrayed their values so completely. "This is unacceptable," he stated, his voice like granite. "Utterly unacceptable. We will deal with this, Mrs. Vance. Immediately. You have our deepest apologies for the pain our daughter has caused." Mission accomplished. I offered a few more soft, grieving platitudes, then excused myself. As I walked down their pristine path, I heard Charles's voice, sharp and clear, calling Chloe. I didn't go home. I drove to a nearby park and sat on a bench, letting the autumn wind cool my face. The first phase of retaliation was complete. I had turned Chloe's greatest shield, her respectable family, into a weapon against her. The fallout would be swift and brutal. I was right. My phone buzzed an hour later. It was Chloe. I put it on speaker. The voice that came through was raw, hysterical, stripped of all its former smugness. "Alara. You psychotic bitch. How dare you go to my parents? How dare you?" I said nothing, just let her scream. "They've disowned me. Do you hear me? My own father called me a harlot. They've thrown me out. This is all your fault." I finally spoke, my voice quiet, calm, and lethally precise. "No, Chloe. The fault lies with the person who sleeps with her best friend's husband. I just handed your parents a mirror. If you don't like what they saw, that's your problem, not mine." I ended the call and blocked her number. She would find other ways to reach me, I knew. But the first major blow had landed. Her support system was crumbling. Now it was time to dismantle David's. Chloe's exile from polite society had a fascinating effect on David. Initially, he was furious with me for dragging innocent people into our private mess. But within days, that fury was overshadowed by a more pressing concern. Chloe, unmoored and emotionally volatile, was now clinging to him with the desperation of a drowning woman. His mistress had transformed from a glamorous escape into a high-maintenance liability. I watched it all with detached interest. The tracker showed him moving between work, our apartment, and her place with the frantic energy of a man putting out fires. His text to me became less hostile, more exhausted. He was starting to understand the weight of the chaos he'd created. It was time to add to that weight. David worked as a mid-level purchasing manager at a large, reputable manufacturing firm, Apex Dynamics. It was a position with a comfortable salary and, as he'd occasionally boasted after a few drinks, significant flexibility with vendor selection. I'd always turned a deaf ear, not wanting to know about the gray areas of his professional life. Now I needed to understand them. I started with public records, business registrations, LinkedIn profiles of his known associates. I remembered names he'd mentioned: Slick Rick from Titan Supplies, Always Deals Dave from Benchmark Parts. A few late nights of cross-referencing on obscure business forums and contractor review sites yielded a pattern. These vendors consistently won Apex contracts despite higher bids or spotty delivery records. The whispers were there in the comments sections. How does Titan keep getting the Apex account? Ask the PM with the new boat. It wasn't proof, but it was a scent. And I knew where David kept his old laptops. He was a digital pack rat, never truly deleting anything. One evening, after he'd left for another crisis management session with Chloe, I found his previous work laptop in a closet. The password was, predictably, our wedding date. I spent hours sifting through files. Most were mundane. But in a folder buried within folders labeled Tax Archives 2019, I found a treasure trove. Invoices from vendors with amounts circled in red. PDFs of quotes from different companies for the same part, with the highest one highlighted. And most damningly, several drafts of a personal financial statement for a boat loan, showing a secondary income stream that neatly matched the differential on those inflated invoices. My hands were ice cold as I copied everything to a secure drive. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was fraud. This was the kind of thing that didn't just get you fired, it got you prosecuted. The next morning, I dressed in my most professional outfit, the full ensemble from my rebellion purchase. I dropped Leo at Mrs. Alves's with an extra-long hug. Mama has to go do something important today, my love. Be good for Abuela Alves. I drove to the sleek glass headquarters of Apex Dynamics. I walked into the spacious, cool lobby, my heels clicking on the marble with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I approached the receptionist. I need to speak with someone in HR and legal, please. My name is Alara Vance. I'm here for a whistleblower disclosure regarding one of your employees, David Vance, in the purchasing department. I have evidence of systematic kickback fraud. The receptionist's eyes went wide. She picked up the phone, her voice hushed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a stark modern conference room across from a stern woman from HR and a grim-faced man from the legal department. I laid it out calmly, logically. I presented printed copies of the most glaring documents. I explained the timeline, the vendors, the discrepancies. As his wife, I only discovered this information recently while dealing with unrelated personal matters, I said, my voice dripping with dignified pain. I believe in ethical business practices. I couldn't, in good conscience, remain silent, knowing this was happening and that Apex and its shareholders were being defrauded. They asked questions, took notes, collected my copies. The legal counsel's face was a mask of professional concern, but I could see the cold anger beneath. This was a liability and a scandal they would want to contain with extreme prejudice. The entire process took 2 hours. As I stood to leave, the HR head spoke. Mrs. Vance, we take these allegations extremely seriously. You'll be hearing from us. And, thank you for your integrity. Her tone suggested she also pitied me, which was fine. Pity was a useful tool. I walked out of the building into the midday sun. My heart was racing, but my spirit was calm. I had just pulled the pin on a grenade and rolled it into David's professional life. The detonation was swift. He called me at 4:17 p.m., his voice a shattered, trembling mess. Alara, what did you do? I have no idea what you're talking about, David. Pie job. Security just escorted me out of the building. They confiscated my laptop. They're talking about an audit, about lawyers. They mention vendors. The boat loan. How did you get that? I could hear the sheer, pants-wetting terror in his voice. The invincible provider, the master of his domain, was facing utter ruin. It sounds like your unethical business practices finally caught up with you, David. That has nothing to do with me. You did this. You're destroying me. I paused, letting his panic echo down the line. No, I said finally, my voice quiet and absolutely clear. You made the choices. I'm just ensuring there are consequences. I hung up. He called back 12 times in the next hour. I sent them all to voicemail. When he finally stumbled through the apartment door that night, he looked a decade older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shock. He didn't yell. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and a dawning, terrible respect. "They're not pressing charges," he mumbled, sinking onto the couch. "Conditional on immediate termination and full restitution of the disputed amounts. My career, it's over. No one in this industry will touch me. I was making dinner for Leo. I didn't turn from the stove. That's unfortunate." He laughed, then a dry, broken sound. "You win, Alara. Are you happy? You've completely destroyed me." I turned then, a wooden spoon in my hand. I looked at the broken man on my couch, the architect of my pain. "Happy?" I repeated. "No, David. This isn't about happiness. This is about balance." I had shattered his professional life, just as he had shattered my personal one. The playing field was becoming level. And for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes when he looked at me. He finally understood he was no longer dealing with the woman he'd married. He was dealing with someone he'd created. And her work was not yet done. The atmosphere in the apartment after David's firing was a study in frigid détente. He moved through the rooms like a ghost, spending hours scrolling job boards on his phone, the reality of his situation sinking in with each rejection or non-reply. The money from his severance, a pittance, negotiated down due to the circumstances, was dwindling fast. Panic was slowly eclipsing his anger. Chloe, from what I could glean from his hushed, tense phone calls, was not handling his downfall well. Her messages to me had found a new channel. Instagram DMs from a fake account. They were a chaotic mix of venom and desperation. "You've ruined a good man," followed by, "He's a loser now anyway, just like you." I saved them all. Her instability was my advantage. I, meanwhile, was a pillar of quiet, purposeful activity. I consulted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rosa Silva, recommended by a domestic violence hotline I'd called just for information. I showed Rosa everything. The affair evidence, the financial records, the proof of David's unemployment due to misconduct. "Your primary goals?" Rosa asked, peering over her glasses. "Sole physical custody of my son. The majority of our remaining marital assets. I want the apartment sold and I want a clean final break. No alimony for him, no child support fight from me if I get the asset split I want." I had done my homework. I knew fighting for child support from an unemployed man was a pointless, drawn-out battle. I wanted a clean severance package. A lump sum to start over. Rosa nodded, a faint smile on her lips. A pragmatic approach. Given his adultery and the cause of his job loss, we have significant leverage. The custody should be straightforward. His instability works in your favor. The asset division will push for 80/20ths. Hobok. We'll need pressure. The pressure arrived, predictably, from an unexpected quarter. A new flurry of Instagram DMs from CCFan23. An ultrasound image, grainy and iconic. Then a close-up of a positive pregnancy test beside a bottle of prenatal vitamins. The caption, "The heir is coming. Your time is up." Chloe was pregnant. A cold, clear calm settled over me. This wasn't a setback. It was the final piece of the puzzle. David, traditional to his core, with a mother who hounded him for a male heir, would see this as a divine mandate. Chloe, sensing power, would use it as a crowbar to finally pry him completely loose. I didn't react to the DMs. Instead, I had Rosa draw up the initial divorce papers, outlining my terms. 80/20 asset split, primary residence with me until sale, sole legal and physical custody of Leo. I served them to David at the kitchen table. He read them, his face purpling. 80%? Are you insane? And you want to keep Leo from me? He's my son. He's the son you forgot to ask about when you were thrown across the room for trying to hit me, I said, my voice level. I had never mentioned that night to Rosa, holding it in reserve. The terms are non-negotiable, David. Sign them and we can all move on. You can go start your new legitimate family. He sneered, pushing the papers away. I'm not signing this robbery. We'll go to court. A judge will see you for the vindictive shrew you are. Perhaps, I said. I pulled out my phone, opened the secure folder and slid it across the table. It was a collage of Chloe's greatest hits. the rooftop bar, the bathroom selfie, the ultrasound. But how do you think a family court judge will look upon a father who lost his job for fraud, who abandoned his marital home for an adulterous relationship, and who is expecting a child with his mistress while his current wife is seeking divorce? Do you think they'll award you 50-50 custody? Or even generous visitation? Do you think they'll look kindly on you draining marital assets to fight a custody battle for a son you've largely ignored, while preparing for a new baby? He stared at the screen, his bravado crumbling. The visual narrative was devastating. And consider this, I added, my voice dropping to a whisper. If we go to court, all of this becomes public record. The affair. The kickbacks. Your mother will see it. Your future child will one day be able to read it. Or, I tapped the divorce papers. You sign this. You take your 20%. I let the alternative hang in the air, unspoken but crystal clear. Or you face total humiliating exposure. David's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a weary calculation. He was cornered and he knew it. Chloe's pregnancy, which he'd likely seen as a new beginning, was now a chain around his ankle in this negotiation. Leo, he started, his voice ragged, will be loved, safe and provided for, I finished for him. He will know the truth when he's old enough to understand it. Not the ugly details, but the simple fact that his mother loved him enough to build a peaceful life for them both. You can be a footnote or a villain in that story, David. Your choice. He picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line for a long, torturous minute. I didn't breathe. This was the moment. If he signed, my freedom was guaranteed. If he didn't, we faced a war of attrition I was prepared for, but dreaded for Leo's sake. With a sigh that seemed to come from the soles of his feet, he scrawled his name. The apartment, he muttered, will be listed next week. You can take whatever you want from your half of the furnishings. I'll keep what Leo and I need. He just nodded, a broken man signing away his old life. I felt no triumph, only a profound, bone-deep relief. The cage door was swinging open. The next month was a whirlwind of logistical purgatory. We listed the apartment. Packing was a surreal archaeology of a failed marriage. Every photo, every souvenir, every piece of ugly decor we'd argued over was a relic of a civilization that had collapsed. I was ruthless, donating or tossing anything that held the faintest whisper of David. I kept only the essentials and Leo's things. The legal waiting period, mandated by the new cooling-off rule, was agony. I lived in constant low-grade fear that David would find some spine, or that Chloe would convince him to recant. My evidence folder was my security blanket. I checked the tracker app less now. Its primary purpose was served. The blue dot moved between a cheap extended-stay motel and Chloe's apartment. Their dream life, it seemed, was a cramped reality. Finally, the date arrived. The day of the divorce decree and apparently, as I would discover, their wedding. David showed up at the courthouse with Chloe on his arm. She was visibly pregnant, her posture one of defiant possession. She dressed for the occasion in a tight white lace dress that was a blatant, tacky statement. David looked shrunken inside his suit. He couldn't meet my eyes. The clerk called our case. The proceeding was antiseptic and swift. A few questions, the shuffle of papers, the definitive stamp. And just like that, I was no longer Alara Vance. I was Alara again. As the clerk handed us our copies of the dissolution decree, Chloe tugged on David's arm, her voice a bright, artificial chirp in the quiet room. Now for the fun part, honey. Window B for the marriage licenses. The clerk, a seasoned woman with tired eyes, blinked slowly, looking from my stony face to their linked arms. She'd seen it all, but this was a new level of audacious cruelty. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I slid my decree into my portfolio, turned on my heel and walked out without a backward glance. Their petty theater was beneath me. They were already ghost. The sound that followed me out was not their laughter, but the irritated sigh of the clerk and the murmur of other waiting couples. Let them have their victory lap. I had the only prize that mattered, my freedom and my son. I drove to Mrs. Alves's, my hands steady on the wheel. For the first time in over a year I felt light. The weight of the lies, the fear, the humiliation, it was still there, but it was no longer a mountain on my chest. It was baggage I could now choose to unpack on my own terms. When I picked up Leo, I knelt and hugged him fiercely. Hey my love. It's just you and me now. How does that sound? He wrapped his little arms around my neck. And Abuela Alves? I laughed, a real free sound that surprised me. Yes, sweetheart. And Abuela Alves. That night, in the half-empty apartment that was soon to be sold, I made Leo's favorite mac and cheese. We ate on a blanket in the living room, a picnic amidst the boxes. As he slept, I sat by his bed watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The path ahead was terrifyingly blank, but it was mine to draw. I had money from the imminent sale, my sanity and my child. The game was over. I had won my survival. Now I had to figure out how to live. The sale of the apartment closed faster than expected. The market was brisk and I was motivated. When the final wire transfer hit my account, my 80% share, a sum that felt both enormous and terrifyingly finite, I knew it was time to go. The city held nothing for me now but ghosts and bad memories. My future and Leo's lay somewhere else. Somewhere softer. The thought of my hometown, Willow Creek, a sleepy town nestled in a river valley 5 hours north, had been a persistent whisper in my mind. I'd resisted it, ashamed. I had left with such defiance to build a life with David, cutting ties with a stubbornness I now regretted. Going back felt like admitting defeat. But as I looked at Leo, so adaptable and trusting, I realized it wasn't about my pride. It was about giving him roots, family, a yard to play in. It was about giving myself a net to fall into as I learned to fly solo. The drive to Willow Creek was a journey through changing landscapes and shifting emotions. The dense city sprawl gave way to rolling hills, then to the familiar, worn beauty of the valley. With every mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. What if they wouldn't have me? What if my parents' silence over the years was a permanent judgment? Leo, sensing my anxiety, asked from his car seat, "Mom, where is this?" I looked in the rearview mirror at his curious face. "This is where Mom grew up, buddy. We're going to see your grandma and grandpa." We pulled up to the familiar white clapboard house with the wide porch. The maple tree I'd climbed as a kid was bigger. The flower beds were neat. My hands were shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there paralyzed by a lifetime of what. Just then the front door opened. My dad emerged carrying a bag of groceries. He'd aged, his hair more silver than pepper, his shoulders a little more rounded. He stopped dead on the walkway, squinting at the unfamiliar car. Then his eyes found me through the windshield. His expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to a dawning, heartbreaking tenderness. He dropped the grocery bag on the steps. Apples spilled and rolled across the porch. I got out of the car, my legs weak. "Hi, Dad." He crossed the distance in a few strides and pulled me into a hug so tight it crushed the air from my lungs. He smelled of Old Spice and laundry detergent, the scent of my childhood safety. A great, ragged sob broke from my chest, all the fear and pain of the last year finally finding a safe harbor. "Elara. Baby girl," he murmured into my hair, his own voice thick. "You're home." The commotion brought my mom rushing out. She took in the scene, her husband holding her weeping daughter, the strange car, the scattered apples, and her hand flew to her mouth. Then she saw Leo cautiously unbuckling himself in the back seat. "And who is this?" she breathed, her eyes filling with tears. "That's Leo," I managed, pulling back from Dad. "Your grandson." The next few hours were a blur of tears, laughter, and a million questions held carefully at bay. Mom and Dad swarmed Leo with a love so immediate and unconditional it made my heart ache. He was shy for all of 5 minutes before Grandpa had him on his lap, showing him how to whittle a piece of scrap wood badly, and Grandma was plying him with homemade cookies. Over a pot of strong tea that evening, after Leo was tucked into my old bedroom under a quilt stitched by my great-grandmother, I told them everything. The affair, the betrayal, the financial control, the revenge, the divorce. I left nothing out. I braced for the "I told you so," for the recrimination for my years of stubborn distance. It never came. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and warm. "Oh, my brave girl. You should have come home sooner." My dad's face was like thunder, but the storm was for David. "I'll drive down there tomorrow and have a word with that." "Dad, no," I said, a weary smile touching my lips. "It's done. He's lost his job, his reputation. He's tied to a very unhappy woman. He's living his consequence. I need to start over. Here. If you'll have us." The look they shared spoke volumes. Have us. We were the missing piece. Living with my parents, however, was a temporary grace. I knew it. My brother Mark and his wonderful wife Anya, lived nearby and were endlessly supportive, but I understood the delicate dynamics of a divorced daughter moving back home. I needed my own space for my sanity and for Leo's future. A week later I found it. A small, sunny bungalow on a quiet street, a few blocks from my parents'. The elderly owner was moving to a retirement community and wanted a quick sale. It was dated but clean with a fenced backyard where Leo could run. The price by city standards was a joke. I made a cash offer the same day. The feeling of handing over the payment and receiving the keys was transcendent. This was mine. No one could take it away. No lies were baked into its walls. We moved in with the help of Mark, Anya, and my beaming parents. It was chaos filled with love. Leo claimed his room immediately. I stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming onto the bare wood floors, and breathed in the smell of possibility and fresh paint. Life in Willow Creek was a different rhythm. Slow, predictable, deeply connected. Leo started at the local preschool, thriving with the individual attention. I had space to think, to heal. But I also needed to work. The money from the divorce was a cushion, not a livelihood. I had to build something sustainable. Flipping through job listings online was disheartening. The opportunities in Willow Creek were limited to retail, teaching for which I was unqualified, or commuting an hour each way. One afternoon, baking chocolate chip cookies with Leo to christen our new oven, it hit me. The simple alchemical joy of it. The smell filling the house. Leo's face smeared with dough and delight. I had always loved baking. In another life, before David, before the corporate grind, I dreamed of a little cafe. What if, I said aloud to Leo, Mommy sold these? He took a big bite of a warm cookie. He said, Mom, they're the best. It was a seed. A terrifying, exhilarating seed. I started small. I bought better ingredients, perfected my recipes. Not just cookies but scones, tea loaves, brownies. I brought trays to my parents, to Mark and Anya, to their friends. The feedback was ravenous and genuine. My first official order came from Anya's book club. Then the local dentist's office wanted a weekly delivery for their staff. I was working out of my home kitchen, packaging orders late into the night after Leo was asleep. It was exhausting and exhilarating. I named it Alara's Hearth. It felt honest. I was building a new hearth for my family and I was offering its warmth to others. One weekend, on a whim, I set up a simple folding table at the farmer's market. I brought samples. By 10 a.m. I was sold out. By the end of the month I had a waiting list for custom orders. The small business was outgrowing my kitchen. It was time. I leased a tiny, charming storefront on Main Street, just a few blocks from home. The investment was scary, dipping into my capital, but the demand was real. With help from Mark and my dad, we painted, put in display cases and installed a commercial oven. The day Alara's Hearth Bakery opened its doors, a line snaked down the sidewalk. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the town rallying around one of its own who'd come home. My hands shook as I rang up the first sale. I was no longer David's ex-wife or a betrayed woman. I was Alara the baker. I had a place. I belonged. 3 years passed in a blur of flour, sugar, and profound contentment. The bakery was a modest success, more than covering its costs and providing a comfortable, independent life for Leo and me. I'd paid off the mortgage on the bungalow. I'd bought a reliable second-hand van for deliveries. Leo was a bright, funny first grader, secure and loved, with a close-knit circle of grandparents, an uncle and aunt, and a town that watched over him. The past was a closed book, its pain a dull echo. I dated casually, cautiously, but my heart was firmly and happily rooted in my son and my business. My mother's gentle hints about finding a partner were met with a smile and a shake of the head. I'm not against it, Mom. But I'm not looking. What I have is enough. I should have known the universe has a sense of ironic timing. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the post-lunch lull. I was in the back, glazing a batch of lemon loaves, flour dusting my apron, my hair piled in a messy but functional bun. The bell on the front door jingled. Be right out. I called, wiping my hands. I pushed through the swinging door to the front and froze. He stood in the middle of my sunny, sweet-smelling shop, looking like a relic from a bad dream that had stumbled into the wrong decade. David. But it was a David I barely recognized. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a palpable weariness. He was thinner, his clothes cheap and ill-fitting. The most shocking detail was the streaks of gray at his temples and the deep lines around his eyes. He looked a decade older than his 35 years. His gaze swept over the shop, the rustic chalkboard menus, the gleaming cases, the happy photos of Leo and me on the community board, with a mixture of awe and bitter hunger. "Ilara," he said, my name sounding strange on his tongue. A cold wave washed over me, followed by a spike of pure protective fury. How dare he? How dare he find this place, this sanctuary I had built from ashes? "What are you doing here, David?" My voice was colder than the display fridge. He flinched but took a step forward. I had to see you. To see how you were." His eyes drank me in, and I realized with a flicker of satisfaction that I was not the woman he remembered. The tired, faded housewife was gone. In her place was a woman with a straight back, clear eyes, and the healthy glow of someone who worked hard and slept well. My hair was highlighted from the sun, my hands were strong from kneading dough, and I wore clothes that fit me, chosen for comfort and utility, not to please a critic. "You can see I'm well. Now leave. You've really changed. You look amazing." The compliment was pathetic, a rusty tool he was trying to wield. "Amazing what happens when you're not being emotionally drained by a liar," I said flatly. "I have to pick up Leo from school. Say what you came to say or get out." He wrung his hands, a nervous gesture I'd never seen before. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I regret it every single day. What I had with you with Leo. I threw it away for a fantasy." His voice cracked with what sounded like real anguish. Is there any chance we could go back? Start over? Be a family?" The audacity was so colossal it was almost funny. A laugh, sharp and humorless, escaped me. "Go back. David, you poured our life out on the ground. You don't get to pick it back up. There is no back. There's only forward. And my forward doesn't include you. Please," he whispered, taking another step, his hand reaching out. "I'm begging you. For Leo's sake. A boy needs his father." That was the wrong button to push. My composure snapped. "Don't you dare use my son as a bargaining chip. Where was this fervent fatherhood when you were cheating? When you chose her? When you tried to hit me and threw him across a room? He doesn't need a father who sees him as a last resort. He has a family. He has me." Just then the bell jingled again. My brother Mark walked in, his cheerful, "Hey Els, Mom sent over some." He trailed off, taking in the scene. My furious stance, the desperate, unfamiliar man in the middle of the shop. Mark's face darkened. He was built like a linebacker, a gentle giant until his family was threatened. "Ilara? Everything okay?" David shrank back, recognizing the familial resemblance and the clear threat. "This is David," I said, my voice like ice. "He was just leaving." David looked from Mark's clenched fists to my stony face. The last vestige of hope died in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and scurried out the door like a startled rodent. Mark moved to the window, watching him hurry down the street. "Want me to go have a talk with him? Ensure he finds the highway." I let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline leaving me weak. "No. He's not worth it. But, thank you for being here." Mark put a heavy arm around my shoulders. "Always. You want me to pick up Leo today?" "No," I said, squaring my shoulders. "I'll do it. I just want everything to be normal." But the ghost had been stirred. David's appearance was a tremor, a warning. If he could find me, so could she. 2 days later, my premonition proved correct. I was closing up the shop when I saw her through the glass door. Chloe. The transformation was even more shocking than David's. The sleek, sharp-edged beauty was gone. Her face was puffy and etched with permanent dissatisfaction. She wore cheap, garish clothes that did nothing for her figure. She looked drained, weathered, and hard. She looked, I realized with a jolt, like I had looked 3 years ago, like a woman used up and discarded by the very life she'd fought to steal. She didn't come in. She just stood on the sidewalk, staring at the bakery with a venom so pure it seemed to warp the air around her. Our eyes met through the glass. There was no gloating left in her, only a bottomless, resentful misery. I locked the door, turned off the open sign, and faced her. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was just profoundly sad for the hollow woman she'd become. After a full minute, she turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched against the world. Later, through the grapevine of small towns and a discreet call to an old colleague who still lived in the city, I pieced together their story. Their car accident after the divorce had been more serious than I knew. Chloe had miscarried the heir. David had suffered injuries that, while not disabling, had impacted his masculine pride, and according to whispers, certain related functions. His mother had moved in with them in their tiny apartment, a volatile third wheel in a marriage already built on sand. There were constant fights, debt, and a shared misery that had etched itself onto their faces. They had come looking for a lifeline, for the stability and peace I had forged without them. Seeing it, tasting its impossibility, had driven them away, David in cowardice, Chloe in bitter rage. That night I checked the locks twice and peeked in on Leo, sleeping soundly with his stuffed dog. The ghosts had come and found nothing to haunt. My hearth was too warm, my walls too strong. They were echoes of a storm that had already passed. The forecast for Alara and Leo was clear and bright. The attempted incursion by the ghosts of my past solidified something within me. It wasn't just about survival anymore or even about success. It was about unshakable peace. I had built a life so fundamentally mine that their presence couldn't even ripple the surface. They were just debris brushed aside by the steady current of my contentment. Leo flourished. At 7 he was all skinned knees, earnest questions about bugs, and a fierce, protective love for his mom and his bakery. He'd come home from school, dump his backpack, and proudly don his miniature apron to help, by sprinkling sugar on cookie dough, or more accurately, eating most of the chocolate chips. He had my father's patience for fishing and my mother's ear for music. He was whole, happy, and secure. He rarely asked about David. When he did, it was with a clinical curiosity, as if asking about a historical figure. Did the man who was my father really like boats? The title Dad had been retired, a label that no longer fit the vague, shadowy figure in his memory. The bakery, Alara's hearth, became a Willow Creek institution. I hired 2 part-time high school students, twins with endless energy and a gift for customer service. I expanded the menu to include savory lunch items, quiches, hand pies, gourmet sandwiches, which became a hit with the local businesses. The van was perpetually warm from deliveries. I was busy, gloriously so, but I was no longer frantic. I had systems, help, and the deep satisfaction of creating something tangible and beloved. My mother, of course, continued her gentle campaign. Alara Henderson's boy is back from tech school. Such a nice, steady young man. He fixes agricultural equipment, you know. Very handy. Or, Dr. Evans is newly single. A dentist, Alara. Imagine the dental benefits. I'd laugh and hug her. Mom, if I meet someone because my tooth aches, it's probably not destiny. The truth was, I wasn't closed off to love. The bitterness had burned away, leaving behind a clear-eyed understanding of what I would and would not accept. My resistance was to the search, to the idea that my life lacked something fundamental without a partner. I had love in abundance, the messy, glorious love for my son, the deep, anchoring love of my family, the warm, communal love of my town and customers. One rainy Thursday afternoon, a new customer came in. He was around my age, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a faint smear of engine grease on his wrist that he tried unsuccessfully to hide. He ordered a coffee and a rosemary ham quiche, then lingered, admiring the old photos of Willow Creek on the walls. "You're new in town," I stated, not unkindly. It was a small town, I knew everyone. "Just moved here last week," he said with a warm smile. "Taking over the old garage on Oak." "Sam." "Alara," I said, nodding. "Welcome. The quiche is a good choice." "It's fantastic," he said after his first bite, his appreciation genuine. "I've been living on gas station food for a week. This is a revelation." We chatted for a few minutes about the quirks of the town, the best hardware store, the terrible but endearing local news blog. It was easy. Natal. He didn't look at me with pity or curiosity about my past. He just saw the baker with good quiche. Sam became a regular. He'd come in for a morning scone and tell me about a stubborn '68 Mustang he was restoring. I'd give him a day-old loaf for his soup. He fixed the bakery's temperamental cooler fan without being asked, refusing payment and accepting only a year's supply of lemon bars as a joke. We became friends. It was slow, undramatic, and built on a foundation of shared smiles over the counter and a mutual respect for hard work. One evening he asked if Leo and I wanted to see the progress on the Mustang. Leo was ecstatic. Watching my son, so naturally trusting, hand Sam wrenches and ask a million questions, something warm and tentative unfolded in my chest. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was the slow, sure growth of a seedling finding sun. I didn't rush it. I let it be. Sam seemed to understand my pace, my priorities. He never pressured, never assumed. He just showed up steady and reliable, a man who fixed things and kept his word. A year after David's pathetic appearance, on a perfect autumn day, I closed the bakery early. Leo was with my parents for a grandpa fishing extravaganza. I had the rare luxury of an empty, quiet house. I poured a glass of wine, sat on my porch swing, and watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and violet. My phone buzzed. A text from Sam. Saw the closed sign. Everything okay? I smiled. Everything's perfect. Just taking a night off. Good, he replied. You deserve it. And I knew with a certainty as deep as the roots of the old maple in my yard, that I did. I deserved this peace. This life. This quiet, sturdy happiness I had built with my own 2 flower-dusted hands. The future stretched before me not as a script to be followed but as a blank page. There was space on that page for many things. For Leo's growing-up adventures, for the bakery's continued success, for my parents' retirement shenanigans, for the slow, sweet possibility of something more with a man who had grease under his nails and kindness in his eyes. But the most important words on that page were already written in indelible ink. I am enough. The story of the betrayed wife was over. The story of Alara, the baker, the mother, the woman who rebuilt her own hearth from cinders, was just beginning. And it was a story I was proud to tell, one delicious, peaceful day at a time. The end.